So, Dr. Sandler,
Sir.
you can cure depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
And when you
I just gave a little talk about what I'm also counseling.
Welcome back, Steve. This is our 8th episode,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we agreed to do a little divert our attention to what's going on in our culture these days. You know, especially this very sad incidents of two suicides. You know, Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain.
Right.
Committed suicide. Just and this report coming out from the CDC that the incidence of suicide is going up in the country.
Yeah, by like 30%, and up across all age groups.
Yeah.
All age groups.
Yeah. So, and you know, a lot of people are trying to put their heads together and figure out why it is happening. And you know, a couple of things I heard a lot. You know, because the ideas that are being floated as possible causes. You know, one was that. Increase in isolation. People are getting more absorbed in the internet and they're not talking to each other, so they're getting absorbed. And the second was, you know, that substance abuse is going up. And I wondered that, you know, from your perspective, what do you think is going on? And
this is a huge policy question, and I don't think we're going to answer it
Yeah,
today. Everybody's speculating.
Yeah.
And of course, we're clinicians, we're psychiatrists, and so I read this CDC study, and then I think, well, what can we do when the patient comes to our office? Sadly, some of these folks never get there. But what are we doing, and what can we do better when somebody comes in and says, I was just discharged from the hospital, I tried to overdose, or I've never been in the hospital, but I have a lot of thoughts of suicide, and here's what I'm thinking. What can we do?
right.
So, you know, the standard approach now has a lot to do with coping skills. I hear a lot of people come in from hospitals and from other therapists and say, I've been working on my coping skills. So when I get these thoughts, I know that what calms me down is to talk to a friend or do some yoga breathing or listen to my favorite music or something like that. All of that's fine, but using the principles of dynamic therapy that we've been talking about, and I talked
But
about...
you want to cure the problem, right?
I'm an idealist.
Yeah.
I want to cure the problem. Can we go beneath the surface and find out what's going on? And I think in some cases we can. I think in some cases I have.
Yeah.
But the first problem is this problem I encounter when I'll say to somebody, so why did you take these pills a couple of weeks ago? And the answer is often, well, I was just stressed out. I say, well, why were you stressed out? Everything. It's what the psychologist in Canada, Les Greenberg, calls global distress. I'm stressed out about everything. If you probe a little bit, sometimes there's an event, always in a relationship, or often in a relationship, where somebody feels rejected. My wife said, I'm sick of listening to this, and I thought maybe she's going to leave me. Or somebody says something happens in an important relationship, and the person feels rejected and abandoned.
Right.
And that's when he takes the pill. So sometimes the first step is showing the person, this is the trigger for you. It's a relationship problem and a fear of being abandoned. I've had people say, I'll ask, how did you get to the point of a suicide attempt? And people say, well, I have depression. My depression got worse. That doesn't help us.
Sure.
That doesn't help us.
Sure.
The relationship issue is often key.
Yeah. And even, you know, if you look at the correlation that people are making about people getting isolated because of the internet, that too is a relationship issue that you are not into relationships.
Right.
You know?
I had a patient several years ago, a young guy in his late 20s, maybe 30, who had a couple suicide attempts. And so we identified there's some relationship problems. His girlfriend would say something critical, and then he would go into a torrent of self-criticism. What Freud would have called the harsh superego. It's one of the terms we still use from Freud's work. And it was just relentless criticism. I'm no good, I don't deserve her, I don't deserve to live. And then he began to talk about his dad, who had a terrible temper and would really berate him and say, you're no good, how could you bring home this report card, you're a disgrace to the family, but at high volume. And as a kid, my patient found this all very traumatizing. So I'm talking to him about this one day, and I said, "Are you angry at your dad?" And he says, "No, I'm not angry at him. I feel sad about it." And I said, "I'm suspecting that you have some anger in there because suicide is really an attempt to murder somebody. It just happens to be you that you're murdering." And he said, "No, I'm not angry at my father. But," he says, "I do have this recurrent dream about him." And I said, "So what's the dream?" He says, "I'm beating the hell out of my father.
Wow.
I've got him pinned up against the wall, and I'm just throwing in the punches and punching and punching."
So the mentor of Sigmund Freud said that the dreams are the royal road to the unconscious.
Right, he did. And he overemphasized that,
Yes.
of course. He thought every dream has a meaning.
Yes.
Of course, dreams are sometimes just bits of chaos as the synapses are firing when we sleep. But this fellow talked about this recurrent dream, and then I said, "Let's go into the dream and let's follow it out and see what happens." Just imagine we're in there and you don't wake up because the dream would wake him up. And he imagined punching his father and yelling at him, "How dare you? How dare you treat me like this? How dare you scare me like this when I was such a little kid?"
It has been clearer than that, right?
Yeah. And working with him in this way, he stopped the suicide attempts and the suicide thoughts stopped. And next, all that vicious self-criticism stopped and his depression lifted. And he's one of the people that I say, I believe I cured him.
Right, yeah.
And I think many times, not always, sadly, but many times if somebody comes to the office with suicide thoughts, there's an underlying story. And if we can get to that story and work with him in this way, we can prevent a suicide.
Right, yeah. And the research they define, they say that it is like a heterogeneous category. That suicide is like a disorder, and there are various separate kinds of suicide. And so probably there might be a lot of fixes out there, but this seems to be an important one and maybe a big part of it. Where we have a solution.
Yes.
So
it's a psychological problem.
If
we could work through it, I think the person would stop feeling that way and thinking that way.
Yeah. So what I think that what we can add to this whole discussion that's going on in the country about suicide, that people are saying be more sensitive and listen to people, don't stigmatize anyone, pick up the phone, call the suicide hotline. What we are saying is that go in and talk to a therapist who listens to you, sits down, tries to understand and figures out what's going on inside that person's mind and help them deal with it, right? That is another thing that should be done, and people should know that this is happening out there, and this might be a big help.
Yes, but we also have to challenge the medical model that says that depression and anxiety and panic and suicidality, quote unquote, are all medical diseases caused by genes. We'll talk more about this at some point. The research does not support that. None of the research I've seen supports that. And if we take this medical model, then we're going to do something partly helpful by saying, let's work on your coping skills. But we're not going to be digging for a psychological root because we're thinking, well, there's a medical root.
Right, yeah.
And I think many times there's a psychological root and we could cure the patient.
But it is a complicated issue, right?
Absolutely.
They're also seeing that people who commit suicide, regardless of their diagnosis, there's this problem with the serotonin receptors in a particular part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, and they have defined the ventral prefrontal cortex, and so there's something going on there. So there's some biology there.
There is, but the question is, what's the chicken and what's the egg?
Okay.
Was there something wrong with serotonin receptors which caused the suicide or the suicide attempt? Or was there a lot of distress and psychological pain and that changed the receptors in the brain? What came first?
And the moral of the story for me is that that if you find that someone is suicidal and extremely depressed, that you might give them medicines to address that part of the cortex. But that doesn't mean that you kind of don't go in and do the real work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's some evidence that meds can lessen the rate of completed suicides.
Mhm.
So whatever we need to do, let's do it. Right.
So I hope we helped you understand one part of this whole puzzle that we are talking about. And Dr. Sangler, thanks for your explanation. Always make a complex issue sound simple.
Always nice to chat with you.
Right, yeah. And so we'll stop here today. And
Yep.